This WOW gathering happens the first Sunday of every month, starting at 6 o'clock. That's when the main message starts. Of course, we do begin a little earlier than that, 4:30 for Sunday school, 5 o'clock for prayer. We also gather on the last Thursday of every month, starting at 7. That's when we have a special guest speaker to come. And we've had quite a few guest speakers. All of them have just been amazing. And it's all because of God. Because really, how can so many anointed speakers come under one roof every single month? It's a total work of God. Our Bible study is every Tuesday, starting at 7 o'clock at the Old Country Buffet in York on Route 13. We are seen locally here on Comcast 16, the White Rose Network, 8:30 Sunday mornings for the Sunday school broadcast, 8 o'clock in the evenings for 8 o'clock Sunday evening, I should say, for the main message, and then, which is then rerun Monday mornings at 4 a.m. We're also seen 3 times a week on the Bright Star Network in Pakistan. This is the highest rated broadcast on the Bright Star Network, reaching more than 40 million people in Pakistan and surrounding regions. And that's all made possible by gifts and offerings from people like you. For those who have been sending in offerings, we thank you. And we just want you to know that everything you've given has gone straight into the ministry, into spreading the gospel, spreading news about the end times. And nothing has ever gone to any kind of salary of any sort. Everything here is done on a voluntary basis. And even if you're not feel led to give, by all means, let us know who you are and let us know who's watching us out there on TV and the internet. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get to know you, and we'd love to pray for you as well. For those here presently, we have an offering basket. For those of you who have an offering or a tithe, by all means come up. You can come up now, or you can come up at the end of the service. Either one is fine. All right, I almost forgot. On the third Friday of this month, Rabbi Ed Frankovich is going to be here. He'll be sharing the things that God has laid on his heart and has revealed to him about what's going on in the world, what's going on as far as the end times, and he's also here to answer any question you may have. Welcome, one and all, to Sunday School, Upper Room Ministries in Dover, PA. As we continue our studies of the prophecies of the Bible, which have come to pass and which have yet to come. This entire series is being recorded for DVDs. So if you miss a few episodes, or if you join us late in the process, don't worry. Every single episode will be available once upon the completion. All right, we finished up Jeremiah last week. So now we are in the book of Lamentations. Let's go to chapter 4, verses 21 and 22. Verse 21 is prophecy 22-23. It's talking about judgment that will fall upon Edom. It says, "Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest up in the land of Uz. The cup shall also pass unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken. Thou shalt make thyself naked." And then if you glance down in verse 22, it says, O daughter of Edom, he will discover thy sins. So this was a judgment that has already taken place. But in verse 22, it's prophecy 22:24, the punishment of thy iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. This is this was not something that's been fulfilled yet. Jerusalem will never again be carried away in captivity until the second coming. So that is a prophecy that has not yet come to pass. And those are the only prophecies of the book of Lamentations. So now we shall move to the book of Ezekiel, the third of the four major prophets. Ezekiel's prophecies begin in chapter 3. Please turn there if you're following along. Okay, in chapter 3, this is where God presents a scroll to Ezekiel, and he is commanded to eat the scroll. He eats it, and it tastes very sweet in his mouth. And what this represents is God's commissioning of Ezekiel to speak his word. The sweetness of the scroll is simply symbolic of the delight of God's word, even though what God has to say through Ezekiel is not exactly what you'd call sweet. He is told, starting in verse 4, Son of man, go, get thee into the house of Israel, and speak with my words unto them. At this, again, this is a time where Israel is being very, very rebellious. In fact, in verse 7, which is prophecy 22:25, but the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee, or they will not hearken unto me, for all of the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Now, you might ask the question, well, if no one's going to listen to Ezekiel, why send him out there in the first place? It's because God is very merciful, and he wanted to give them the opportunity to turn from their wicked ways. But at this point, they're so hard-hearted, they have no desire at all to turn. So obviously Ezekiel would be faced with a lot of hostility. But verses 8 and 9, God says, I have made your face strong against their faces, and thy forehead strong against their foreheads. So God promises to equip Ezekiel to be hard and to be strong. And that is prophecy 22:26, which is obviously fulfilled as he did go about and do everything he said what God told him to say, and the house of Israel reacted as hard-hearted as expected. We'll skip ahead to verse 25. Says, but O thou, O son of man, behold, they shall put bands upon thee, and they shall bind thee with them, and shall not go out among them. So God is prophesying that if the house of Israel will tie him up with ropes, so he can't go out and prophesy amongst them. And then verses 26 and 27 is a prophecy about Ezekiel's voice. I will make your tongue cleave to the roof of your mouth, that you shall be dumb, and shall not be to them a reprover. What that's saying is God will make it impossible for Ezekiel to pray for Israel, simply because there's no point in praying for them. But when I speak with you, I will open your mouth, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord, he that heareth, let him hear, and he that forbeareth, let him forbear. So, yeah, he will allow Ezekiel to speak when when God chooses to speak through him. More or less, he'll not be allowed to speak when Ezekiel wants to speak for himself. This is truly a man that is in complete surrender to God, most definitely. Chapter 4. In this chapter, God commands Ezekiel to draw a map of the city of Jerusalem and demonstrate on the map how the city will be attacked. This is also where he is commanded to lie on his side for 430 days. He would lie 390 days on his left side, to symbol one day for every year of sin the house of Israel has been in, and then he would turn over on his right side, lie for 40 days, symbolic of every year that the house of Judah has been in sin. And for his food, he was commanded to bake bread using human excrement as fuel. And the reason he did this was a symbolic act, because in verse 13 of chapter 4, and the Lord said, "Even thus shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles, whither I will drive them." So the prophecy here is that Israel will eat defiled food, defiled bread, amongst the Gentiles, most likely while they're in captivity. That's prophecy 22:29. Ezekiel protested because he had no desire to defile his own self by eating bread cooked over human excrement. So God relented and instead allows him to use cattle excrement to bake his bread. And then in verses 16 and 17, God talks about a scarcity of food and water in the city of Jerusalem. So it's a prophecy of famine. Famine has been prophesied over Jerusalem multiple times here in the major prophets, and again it's being continued. Again, God will quite often say the same thing multiple times, just so he gets his point across. And after a while, it's just impossible not to get his point. Correct? Chapter 5. And in this one, Ezekiel receives another command to shave his head and his beard, and to divide all of the hair into 3 parts. 1/3 of the hair was to be chopped up by a sword. Another third was to be burned up with fire, and the remaining third was to be tossed into the wind. This would be symbolic of what would happen to Jerusalem. 1/3 destroyed by fire, 1/3 killed by the sword, and the remaining third scattered into the wind, most likely into captivity. That's prophecy 22:31. Then we go to chapter 5, verses 8 through 11. This is prophecy 22:32. Here, God is simply promising extreme judgments upon Israel. The particular verse that stands out, "Therefore the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers, and I will execute judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into all the winds." That is most definitely a prophetic statement. In fact, you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, one of the things God mentions is cannibalism will exist amongst his people, should they choose to rebel against his commands and his precepts. And God is saying, you're simply going to endure what I said you would endure way back yonder in the days of Moses. Okay, then prophecy 22:33. Here, the methods of destruction are again spoken: fire, sword, and captivity. You know, 1/3 fire, 1/3 sword, 1/3 into the wind. And that's prophecy 22:33. Oh. Then we go down to verse 14. Moreover, I will make thee waste and a reproach among the nations that are around about thee, and in the sight of all that pass by. So it shall be a reproach and a taunt and an instruction and an astonishment unto the nations that are around thee, when I shall execute judgments in thee in anger and in fury. This is prophecy 22:34. He's prophesying the reaction of surrounding nations that will just be absolutely astonished by how thorough the destruction is, and will also mock Israel because they are now fallen. Okay, and then verses 16 and 17. Again, this is another promise of famine. Verse 16, when I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine. And verse 17, so will I send famine upon you and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee. Again, that's prophecy 22:35. Chapter 6. Starting in verse 3, thus saith the Lord God to the mountains, and to the hills, and to the rivers, and to the valleys, behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and will destroy your high places. So, believe it or not, Ezekiel is being commanded to prophesy against the lands, the hills, and the rivers, and the valleys. Apparently, because all of this was a source of idolatry for the people of Israel, and we people today, we worship nature, we worship creation, but not the Creator. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. I guess that sort of thing happened way back then also. In fact, it must have, otherwise Ezekiel wouldn't have prophesied against the land, would he? So that itself, destruction of the land, is a prophecy, 22:36. But then in verse 5, it says, I will lay the dead carcasses of the children of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones around your altars. And that's prophecy 22:37. Okay. Then verses 8 through 10, prophecy 22:38. Again, this is another prophecy of the remnant, the 1/3, that will escape. And in regards to the remnant, it says, you shall be scattered through the countries. Again, that was symbolized by the hair being scattered up into the wind. It says, and they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be captives, because I am broken with their whorish heart, which hath departed from me, and with their eyes which go a-whoring after their idols. And they shall loathe themselves for the evils for which they have committed in all their abominations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So, this remnant will also be a repentant remnant, wanting to make things right again with the God of Israel. And that does happen in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, where the remnant returns, rebuilds the walls, and rebuilds the temple. Verse 11. Thus saith the Lord God, smite with thine hand, and stamp with thy foot, and say, Alas, for all the evil abominations of the house of Israel, for they shall fall by the sword, and by the famine, and by pestilence. Prophecy 22:39. Then verse 13. Then ye shall know I am the Lord, when their slain men shall be among their idols, round their altars, high upon every high hill, and in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, and all the place where they did offer a sweet savor to all their idols. So, again, this goes back to what was spoken of earlier in chapter 6, where God says, "I will scatter your bones around your altars," the altars of their idols. I believe verse 13 is simply a repeat of that. That's prophecy 22:40. And verse 14, "So will I stretch out my hand upon them and make the land desolate, yea, more desolate than the wilderness towards Diblath, and all their habitations." So that's prophecy 22:41, complete desolation of Israel. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 9, prophecy 22:42. This is, God is saying this is going to be a final judgment, again a complete wipeout of Jerusalem. And he says he shall do it with no pity, none whatsoever, in verse 9. And the land will be desolate until the remnant returns. And prophecy 22:43 in verses 10 through 15. Again, this passage covers the promise of sword, pestilence, and famine. And then we go down to verses 16 through 18. And again, a prophecy in regards to the remnant that will escape. It says in verse 16, "All of them mourning, every one for his iniquity, all hands shall be feeble, and all his knees shall be weak as water. They will also gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them. Shame will be on all their faces, baldness upon all their heads." Yeah, I read this and I think of Daniel. When he was fasting and praying, he was in sackcloth and ashes, just grieving over the sins of his people. So if Daniel was doing it, chances are there are a whole lot of other people doing it too. Whether they were doing it at the same time as Daniel, I don't know. But they had to have been doing it because God said so. Then in verse 19, starting verse 19, "They shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold will not deliver them on the day of the wrath of the Lord." This is prophecy 22:45. Money is an idol, and God had said, He'll lay waste all idols, and apparently this remnant will come to the realization that money is not going to save them. Money can't do anything for them, and they're just going to cast it all out of the onto the streets. And verse 19 says, "Because it is the stumbling block of their iniquity." And then in verse 21, "I will give it in the hands of strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it." So, meaning all the gold and silver that they just cast out, apparently Gentiles will scoop it up for themselves and use that money for wicked things. And also 22:46, verse 22, "My face will I also turn from them, and they shall pollute my secret place, for robbers shall break into it and defile it." So God is also going to be turning his face away from the secret place. I guess in this case, the secret place is the temple of God, and he's not going to protect it or honor it. He'll just let robbers do whatever it is they want to it, which are things that would defile God's holy place. Verse 23, Make a chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. Wherefore I will bring the worst of the heathen, and they shall possess their houses. I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy faces shall be defiled. That's prophecy 22:47. The worst of the heathen will take over the homes of the people of Israel. And again, their holy places becoming defiled. Then verse 26. Mischief shall come upon mischief, rumor upon rumor, and they'll seek a vision of the prophet. But the law shall perish from the priest and the counsel of the ancients. So, they're turning to prophets for their hope. They're turning to men, I should say, for their hope. But it'll all be in vain. The law will perish from the priest, and counsel will perish from the ancients. Pretty much the prophets, the priests, and the ancients will be rendered powerless. They won't be able to do anything to help anyone. That's prophecy 22:48. Then verse 27. The king shall mourn, and the prince shall be clothed with desolation, and the hands of the people shall be troubled. I will do unto them after their way, and according to their deserts I will judge them, and they shall know that I am Lord. So here in this verse, God is promising judgment on the royalties, the king and the prince. And it's going to be a just, it'll be a just judgment, because it says, I will do unto them after their way and according to their deserts. I will judge them. I guess this is where the phrase "just deserts" comes from. I mean, I think it does. And they shall know that I am Lord. All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. Join us next time when we'll pick up in chapter 8 of Ezekiel. Thank you.